Hello and welcome to the Classic Car Weekly podcast, the sibling podcast to the popular weekly title. I'm this week's host, Jesse Billington, and I'm joined by our editor, David Simister, and our content editor, James Peen. Gents, how are we? And as we always start, how are the classics?
Morning, it's certainly a busy week as always. The big thing I've got to look forward to this week is I've booked the Toyota Avensis, recently introduced Classic Car Weekly, in for its next MOT. So the latest piece of work I've been doing. I've had the flanges on the exhaust mended, so it sounds a lot quieter than it did. That was a very good repair. But now the big thing will be, do they spot anything else when it's up on the ramp?
Yeah, a good poke around underneath could be revealing. James, how about things on your driveway? How are things progressing?
They are progressing behind the scenes. I mean, you can't see this obviously at home, but I'm holding a wiring diagram that I've sort of cobbled together to sort out my dynamotor, which seems to make sense to me. So that's my job for the weekend, to try and get that charging. So yeah, things are happening, and new battery cable. So bits are turning up. So if I have to dash off, it's because the postman's coming to my door. But that's hopefully will be okay for the rest of this one.
Very nice. I've got some online ordering to do as well because we've finally got the engine timed in. We think we had the front end of the MG completely stripped down, refitted the old sprocket which had the timing marks on it to the camshaft, realigned that, and figured we're about sort of possibly 3 or 4 teeth out, which is why it ran, but just not very well at all because it was sort of achieving either not a lot of compression or not drawing in any fuel or air. So yeah, we've got that timed properly now, cleaning down all of the front engine dress face and the timing chain cover, ready to reassemble and reinstall. So we're not far off, and I have had a friend promise that he'll help me sort out the steering, because to get all of it, you remove the steering rack, remove it from the steering column, and then immediately everything goes a bit wobbly and falls out of alignment. So yeah, progress. And the Jimny is booked in to go to a workshop to have the tail seal on the gearbox sorted, because that has sprung a leak and it looks rather untidy on my parents' lovely resin driveway, constantly dripping. So they weren't too happy about that. So strong-armed into getting that fixed as well. But with a busy calendar, I've had to hand that over to a workshop instead. So yeah, it's busy from my end, let's say. And yeah, we've got plenty to look forward to, at least the MG getting back on the road soon. Anyway, we'll move on from our classics and we'll kick off with the lead story in this week's paper. And it's a nice dive into the culture around classics and a welcome sign of the community around classics getting more welcoming. James, this was one that you sort of wrote and put together.
Yeah, it's about this dreaded I word, inclusivity, which I know a lot of people are put off with. But essentially, shows do need to be a bit more inclusive in who they invite for their doors. So in terms of people and cars, we just need to be a bit more welcoming in general, due to the changing demographic and what people are into.
And sort of we've had some interesting names come forward to back this up. Sort of who did you go off and sort of speak to sort of get that sort of word from the community, word from show organisers, event people on?
Oh, well, the obvious choice was to speak to Steph Hoy, because obviously she's one of the main organisers of Rusterville, which is probably one of the most inclusive shows you can actually possibly visit in the UK. And she had a great deal to say, as I'm sure anyone who reads this issue will find out.
Mm. It's definitely something that we've seen sort of physically coming through as a change. David, you've been to a lot of sort of more traditional shows and events recently. Have you seen sort of a similar thing, a sort of broader array of cars on display, as well as sort of a broad array of people attending?
Yeah, I think the classic car hobby and our movement is evolving and changing all the time. And certainly over the past few years, I've noticed quite a few trends. I mean, it was only this morning that Haggerty, the classic insurance company, got in touch and said that they were expanding their insurance remit to include more cars, the classic cars that are up to 50, as young as 15 years old now, and drivers who are as young as 21. And that, I think, reflects an appetite in our industry to try and get more young people and people with more sort of a more diverse range of cars into events and onto the roads. And certainly I've seen that when I've been out and about with the events. That, don't forget, that's a 28-year-old car that's only a year and a half of being recognised by FIBA as an historic vehicle. And again, if I'd taken that to a show sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I would have been shunted off into the car park next door with all the cash guys and Skodas and things like that, with the brand new cars. But nowadays, actually, when I'm pulling in, I'm actually seeing more and more shows actually saying, coming in, show it off as part of the classic display. And I think actually we've seen that a lot with the way the hobby's been sort of changing over the years. And I think it is in our interest to kind of welcome these new enthusiasts. These are the kind of the people who are driving around in things like Fiesta STs and maybe things like Skoda Octavia RSs and more modern cars, because I think that that ultimately these are the cars that's the future, and these are the people who, if we get them interested in cars now and the kind of events that we love, when the kind of cars like Rover P6s and so on, when they're handed down, they're more likely to be cherished in future.
Yeah, the sort of younger cars that people sort of get to grips with the idea of owning a classic car. So it means that when they sort of inherit and sort of come into ownership of the more sort of what we see as traditional classic cars, they're familiar with the process, familiar with sort of the idea of owning a car that has quirks and foibles that you have to sort of stay on top of maintenance with. It's a great learning curve that allows people an appropriate pathway into the hobby. And yeah, I think we talked about it after we'd been to Festival of the Unexceptional, which always has a brilliant crowd. I know it's referenced in the story as well. And it is one of those things that's nice to see, because also certainly as a young person attending events, you start to see more and more faces akin to your own, and it makes it a far more sort of enjoyable event to attend, because you know that you've got friendship groups that are going to be there, you've got people that you can sort of talk to on a sort of similar level. It's great in that sense, because it makes it a far more sort of appealing thing to attend on a community level as well, sort of certainly speaking from that younger end of the scale. And I know that that sort of trickles out into other elements of sort of inclusivity and diversity. It's not just a case of sort of having young people along. It encompasses a broad range of sort of societal features, but it is good news overall, and something that
Yeah.
we're looking forward to seeing spread.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we have seen, particularly over the last 5 years or so, is an increase and a change in the way that younger enthusiasts in particular use their old cars. So it used to be back in the day that if you had a classic car, you might only use it as a second car or take it out, occasionally. But actually, what we're seeing more and more now, because I think it's because cars are better made than they were originally. Sort of a 25-year-old car now is generally a lot more reliable and usable than a 25-year-old car would have been 25 years ago. So what we're seeing now is people actually using more of these old cars as daily drivers, and certainly I do. And I know, Jesse, you've got a car that's again is an older car that you use on a regular basis, and obviously that's something that the industry is having to reflect, particularly the insurance industry. It's one of those, I'm sure all of us, we could go to a new car show and go and lease a brand new car tomorrow, but we don't want to because we enjoy our older cars more.
Mm. I know a lot of my friends in the group in the sort of the classic world actually sort of daily older cars still. A friend of mine dailies a TR6 and sort of a few others beside. One runs a early series Land Rover as well, that's sort of his daily car. And yeah, they've had to sort of adapt a few bits and pieces here and there just to sort of fit the car into their lifestyle a bit better. But I mean, it helps that one of them works for a major classic parts supplier and one of them does a lot of automotive photography. So they're sort of cars that fit nicely into their world. But again, that sort of idea that they've been able to sort of find their way into this hobby and find it to be sort of an accepting and appealing place to be is quite great.
I mean, I think again it comes down to demographic, doesn't it? It's like you look at what the average young person is driving now. That's a much more usable car, isn't it? So you're more likely to see a 20-year-old Micra on the road on a daily basis than you are something slightly older that's probably more horrendous to live with.
Yeah, sort of the younger classic cars are sort of generally more tractable to live with. I mean, if we're talking 20 years old, we're looking at sort of not even the K11 Micra, the K12, the jelly mold shaped one, and that's, to all intents and purposes, in my mind, that's still a modern car. You just get that if you dropped your car in for servicing and repairs as like your hire car. But
Do you know,
that's
it's funny
the
actually. I saw one of those. Like I was having a walk last night just to stretch the legs, and I saw someone that was out and about in an L-Reg K11 shaped Nissan Micra, and again it was properly based spec. It's on with a little outline of the car on the boot lid and the steel wheels. And I just remember I was there thinking, while that is a car, you could use that every day, and it would probably never let you down. When was the last time you saw a completely unmolested K11 base spec Micra knocking about?
Oh, a clean and tidy one, not
Really
being
clean, really clean and tidy outside of Festival and Exceptional.
outside of a Domino's pickup point as well.
Well, they do seem to love them at Domino's pickup points, and I can fully understand why.
It's plenty of space inside for a lot of 12-inch pizzas, and obviously you're quite fuel efficient as well. So any mileage you cover, you seem to reap the rewards when it comes to that as well. But yeah, they've sort of not faded into obscurity, but certainly sort of transitioned from being sort of essentially street furniture for a long while to cars that people are sort of going, oh, it's quite nice. I'll just look after it now, which is a bit. It's odd to say that about the Nissan Micra, but hey, that is the beauty of the ever-changing world of classic cars, and of course the ever-changing legislation that surrounds classic cars. We've got sort of a further update to the DVLA story. We mentioned this last week, and we've sort of had further clarification around it and what this could possibly mean. And I think this is a really interesting one. Obviously, we've been working away, sort of listening to club views and your viewpoints on this as well. But what have been sort of the latest updates we've picked apart these sort of releases from the DVLA?
Well, it's really interesting again because we got those of you who will have seen last week's Classic Car Weekly had the initial announcement from the DVLA, the roads minister, talking about the fact that they've changed some of the rules affecting classic car policies, and what we've since had is a bit more industry reaction. So the Federation of British Historic Vehicle Clubs have been in touch with us, as has the Historic and Classic Vehicles Alliance, and I think they are the two really key organisations representing classic owners and businesses who are, who've coordinated a lot of this and sent in a lot of the feedback. And from both of them, it seems to be really positive. So I think it will mean far fewer headaches, I think, on the part of classic car owners when they're trying to get things like cars put back on the road or registrations updated. But the thing that I'm really keen to hear about is, if you're listening to this, is what do you guys think about this? You know, the classic car owners who are actually living and breathing this day to day. It's been a while since I've had to have a car registered myself, but I know that there are restorations going on right across the country right now. And what I'd like to know is the new rules are up there on the DVLA's website. Have a look online, and we would love to know what you think of them.
Yeah, obviously, if you've got sort of thoughts about it, if you're going through a restoration at the moment and have had to sort of come across these new rules and regulations, let us know what you think. I'll put the email address in sort of the description for the podcast, wherever you find it. And of course, it's always best reached editorial@classiccarweekly.co.uk. Drop us a line there with your views and thoughts. James, have you heard sort of much else from the industry side of things, or sort of where does the general populace seem to be sort of going with this thought?
I think everyone seems to be quite thrilled, as much as that they've had their concerns listened to. It seems like, speed to wheel gets the wheel. So, if you've got a complaint, if you've got an issue, if you direct it to the right people, then, there's every chance that you might get listened to. So I think from what I've seen so far, everyone seems quite positive to the reaction so far.
So overall, this is a great step in the right direction for sort of classic owners, as their thoughts and sort of views when it comes to legislation around our cars is listened to appropriately. We'll move then on from sort of the more hard-hitting news to something a bit more sort of the bright sunlit uplands of the Lakelands and also Brooklands, because obviously show season rolls on. And David, we mentioned it a little bit last week. You were at the Lakeland Motor Show, weren't you? And how did it go? What was the overall thoughts?
Yeah, this is one I was really keen to get to. Haven't been to it before and really enjoyed it. This is the Cumbria Classic Motorsport Show. It's held at Dale Main in the Lake District, and which is a stately home just up the road from Ullswater. And I was staggered by the sheer, not only the scale of the turnout, but also the variety. They had upwards of 800 cars on show. I mean, they were ramming them in pretty much anywhere they could find space for them. And but it wasn't. There really was something there for everyone. There was a really strong display of pre-war cars. They had sort of 50s and 60s saloons. They had modern classics. They had a section for younger drivers. They had Malcolm Wilson was there with his very first rally car, his Ford Escort Mark One. They had it was a bit of everything really, and I think it just showed it was a dramatic. For me, it was a really positive success story about sort of how buoyant our hobby is at the moment.
Yeah, and if we had to twist your arm to pick a favorite car that you spotted across the event, what would you be sort of twisted into saying was sort of your standout classic you spotted?
Oh, there's so many different ones to choose from. I mean, the one that I particularly liked was there was a 1967 Vanden Plas 1100, which had only done 5,000 miles from new. It was absolutely stunning. I wish I'd been able to. Produce an edition of CCW which had a kind of a scratch and sniff panel, because the smell of that interior was just absolutely glorious. It was probably one of the nicest 60s interiors I've seen on any car, let alone an ADO 16. And again, it was just an incredible example of something that was just really, really well preserved.
When it comes to sort of having great turnouts for shows, the recent one we saw was also the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club at Brooklands, where they had 170 shadows turn up for the event. And that is an astonishing sort of outreach. And the photograph is incredible, because you just see all of these shads just sort of disappearing into the distance towards the banking as well.
Yeah, and that was I think that was actually the same day as the Lakeland show. So sadly I couldn't make it down. So sorry for that event. I haven't mastered teleportation just yet. But again, this was a really really good representation of this was clubs at their best. Really, kind of they took inspiration from an old Rolls-Royce publicity press shot, and they invited any SY based car that came from Cruise. So the Bentley T series was invited along as well, as was the various Corniche derivatives. So any car that was based on that sort of Silver Shadow platform was invited along, and they had people from not only around the UK but across the Channel as well coming along. So that actually this was a really impressive, it was a stunning spectacle, this particular thing, and a really fitting celebration to a really wonderful British classic, and actually the car which I used as my wedding car. So I've got a particular fondness for the first generation Silver Shadow.
When you say, obviously it comes to sort of clubs celebrate it, or sort of clubs doing what they're best at, I think this was something that we're quite familiar with, sort of seeing clubs turn out en masse when it comes to these big events. But I had the fortune of taking a sort of friend of mine around the Silverstone Festival on Saturday, and they've come from Australia. They're sort of used to having a bit of a classic car scene out there, but arriving at Silverstone and sort of showing them the absolute wealth of car clubs on display, he said it was absolutely astounding that we've sort of got this huge thriving scene out here that is so supported. And importantly, it's not just a British thing. Like you said, David, we had cars coming from across Europe to attend the Silverstone Festival as well, and we'll touch on it when we get our report out in the latest issue. But it's just one of those things that sort of, it's only when someone else from outside points it out, you go, actually, yeah, this is really damn impressive. And it is great to see the support for clubs and sort of the brilliant sort of cross-nation sort of support for classic cars as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things which I'm forever being reminded of is that the NEC Classic Motor Show in November is the world's largest gathering of classic clubs, and I think actually that very clubs are very much the cogs that make the classic car movement go round, and I think no other country in the world does it as well as we do in the UK. I think they're really involved. Yeah, they're really involved in not just sort of helping classic owners and sending out things like newsletters, but actually really putting these wonderful old cars in the spotlight. It's they do it. They're very well practiced at it, and they are moving with the times in a lot of cases too.
It is always fantastic to see. We'll move into our lead feature that's out in this week's issue, and this was a brilliant theory. I think this was one from the sort of the notebook of Chris Hope, our features editor, and this is the idea of zero to hero. This is underappreciated cars, or cars when they were new were underappreciated, that have become beloved classics now. And there are some interesting cars in here that I hadn't anticipated appearing. Obviously, sort of these were cars that I didn't know about, sort of what sort of trials and tribulations they went through when they were released. So it proved quite an interesting read for me. But certainly there are some interesting picks in there. And James, I'll start off with yours, because I think yours is a slightly sort of more down the line option, the Skoda Estelle.
Just one of those cars that, as a child who was born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, it seemed to be the butt of every single comedian's jokes. The Skoda or the Lada, it was the two cars that you just did not want to be associated with in any way. But I've always kind of liked them for their sort of weird, rear-engined East Europeanness. And when was the last time you saw an Estelle? You don't, unless you see an absolute minter or any, you go to like a show and you see one, it always stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? It's one of those cars that people always talk about. They always point out the jokes, but then they're, it's a cool car now.
Mm.
You wait long enough and something will become appreciated.
Yeah, it is a unique choice in that sense. And we found one for sale actually that's in there as well for £8,000, which is strong money for what sort of 10, 12 years ago would have just been sort of, again, just a bottom rung, sort of incredibly sort of niche joke, really. But yeah, it is I
But
quite like that.
it's one of those things though
tasty.
as well. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but when was the last time you saw another one, especially one in that sort of condition?
Yeah, it is very much the argument of find another. David, your choice was a very surprising one to me because I didn't know a huge amount about sort of the early years of the 308 GT4. So I was sort of always left thinking, oh well, yeah, it was sort of the Dino, it was the baby Ferrari, but I never anticipated it having sort of complete zero status.
Yeah, I mean the Ferrari or Dino 308 GT4, depending on which mark you want to attribute it to. Well, I remember for years it was always the kind of the Ferrari that no one really wanted much to do with, and it's yeah, it was very much it kind of fell between the Dino 246, which is a beautiful example of Dino at its finest, and the much later Ferrari 308 GTB and GTSs, which again they were really real return to form for Maranello, and the GT4, I think, as a result, I think people looked at it, they thought it looked a bit awkward. The 2+2 configuration that didn't really work, and it never, but and it had this reputation for years of being a kind of a bit of a Ferrari underdog. But actually, when you look back at it, firstly, when you look back at what road testers actually said about it in period in the early 70s, they actually thought it was a really good car. And secondly, when you actually look at what these cars are now fetching at auction, there was a period, about 15, 20 years ago when you could pick them up for, a pittance in classic car terms. You could get them up, for sort of, under 10 grand in some cases for shonky examples. But now, we've got examples that are regularly changing hands for over 50k, sometimes more. So it just
It's
shows you, it just shows you that those cars have really had a bit of a rehabilitation, I think. And if you wanted my tip on what the car, that's next, we're probably going to follow next, it's probably going to be the Mondial because again, they're not brilliant in terms of top tier Ferraris, but they're nowhere near as bad as people say they are either.
Yeah, they were sort of a bit more sort of floaty and wafty rather than out and
Yeah,
out sort of Ferrari thoroughbreds. But I think there's going to be an appreciation for that, especially as sort of a generation gets sort of differently nostalgic for sort of that late 80s, 90s period. The Mondial might come to it. My pick for this was the Morris Marina, but that's because I'd sort of been sort of led into believing it was a truly terrible car by potentially my Sunday night TV offerings over quite a period of time. But then as I sort of became more and more sort of engrossed in the classic world and sort of friends across clubs, I found that sort of the Young Owners Club, certainly for the Morris Marina and Ital group, is a fantastically enthusiastic bunch, and it sort of revolutionized the way that I view these cars. It sort of became sort of a bit quirky, cool, offbeat. It was a different choice for sort of someone my age to have one. And then I sort of fell in love with a bit of sort of 70s, 80s rallying and found that British Leyland did actually, as sort of a bit of a skunkworks project, have a rally prepped marina that was a good bit of a laugh. I think at one point they did also try shoehorning in a V8 into the marina, but it was a bit unwieldy and a bit too heavy. But yeah, there's a bit in the back of my mind that if I could sort of drum together the budget and find a clean one, I wouldn't say no to building sort of a rally prepped marina and just sort of having fun in one because I think they've got that sort of if you know coolness to them now as well. You sort of go, oh come on, it's a marina, yeah, much like the Estelle, it was sort of the butt of a joke for a while, but I think now it's sort of earned its cachet of being sort of quite interesting.
I think you need to put your money where your mouth is on that one. Prove it.
Oh, well, I've just had to buy a new camera and I'm nearly done with the midget. So perhaps sort of a 2026 project. We'll see if I can sort of find a very cheap marina and sort of start putting it together as a motorsports edition. So 2027, you might see me on stage at Race Retro. Who knows? But yeah, were there any other cars that you sort of ummed and ahed about when it came to making the decisions for these? Any other cars that you were like, oh, that's had a bit of a turnaround in form?
I think there's two that spring to mind for me. One of them, which I think it looks like everyone's avoided this choice just because it is such an obvious zero to hero car, is the Austin Allegro. I've talked before about how they used to be the butt of jokes, but nowadays actually they are very sought after, the good ones, by enthusiasts of particularly sort of BL, in those circles. And the other one, which I think is maybe still sort of lingering in the zero status, but I think is probably overdue a rise to hero, is the Lotus Europa S of the mid noughties. And I think it's not because it was a bad car; it was just a really, really misunderstood one. It was a grown-up Lotus Elise pitched at Porsche Boxster owners, and it's a really, I think, as a more refined spin on the Elise idea, it's brilliant, but you wouldn't necessarily have one instead of an Audi TT.
Yeah, I think that Lotus one is a really good point because the Europa, yeah, it was a bit softer, it was a bit more grown up, it was a bit not necessarily tamer, but certainly sort of something a bit more tractable. You could live with it, and I think everyone sort of went, "Oh, so it's not a Lotus then?" And it sort of went, "Well, no, you've missed the point of it. You've sort of gotten two things muddled up there." That's a good point. James, were there any that sort of crossed your mind as other cars that you would have liked to have sort of given an honourable mention to for having a good turn of form?
Well, like David, I thought about the Allegro, but I still can't bring myself to actually own one. So the other car I thought about was the Porsche 924, which obviously had a bit of a bad rap when it came out to the, Volkswagen van engine and all that sort of malarkey. But the amount you see out there now that people are tending to sort of throw a lot of time and effort into, I think I consider a 924 now, definitely.
I know with my generation, we've got they were because for so long they were the cheapest way of getting a Porsche, sort of Porsche on the drive. My generation really sort of lapped it up as sort of an idea, the 2.4s, the 4.4s, and they've sort of found again that little bit of a cult following that sort of resurrected them and brought them back to mainstream interest. And a lot of people have spent a lot of time making them incredibly tidy and sort of really restoring them. I know that there's a lass who's got a nine, I think hers is a 2.4 Lux, so the high trim model, and she's properly lavished some care into it and sort of really gotten into the whole vibe of it, especially when it's parked up at shows. She has like a sort of small accoutrement of 80s paraphernalia that sort of litter the interior that really finishes off like the aesthetic of the car. And I think that's really sort of helped bring that model back to the fore. So yeah, it's a good shout there. I was trying to think of like other examples of this, and I think I was tempted to say the Series 1 Freelander, which a lot of people sort of derided because at the time Land Rover's offerings of the Discovery were so strong, and the what would have been at that time the early days of the Defender, I think, were so good. And then the Freelander came along with sort of a, everyone sort of went, "Oh, it's a bit wet," and sort of I don't quite get it. A bit like the Lotus Europa argument of it's not really a proper Land Rover, or the Dino 308. It's not really a proper Ferrari. Everyone went, the Freelander's not really a proper Land Rover. And then compound that with the head gasket issues off of that Rover K series engine, everyone sort of fell away from it a bit. But
You
one
see,
of those in
the free
camel
the free
spec.
the freelancer had, I think actually that kind of, I wouldn't say almost fell from grace, but I think it lost a little bit of his reputation later on in its life. I remember when it came out, it was yeah it was really well received at the time. And I think, what was that? I remember watching an old episode of Top Gear, and it was second in the running for their car of the year in 1997, only to the Ford Puma, and it was Britain's best-selling 4x4 for quite a few years, ahead of the Toyota RAV4 and the Honda CR-V.
But it's just sort of tumbled away to obscurity after a little
Mm.
while, and I think that's it. I'm sort of not picking it from it. It did not saying it started as a zero, but it certainly sort of tailed off to one at some point. And I
Build
think now,
quality.
yeah,
That's the issue.
yeah, Solihull's build quality was a little lacking, but I think now people look back at the simplicity and the cleanness of the design of those early Freelanders, especially when you compare it to, say, the modern product with the green oval on the front. You look at it and go, oh, actually, that's quite nice. And especially if you get one that was sort of the Camel Trophy G4 spec, you sort of go, oh, yeah, that's quite good. They also did a V6 as well for a very short run, which is a rare car indeed. But
They
yeah,
did,
there's
and it was also the first Land Rover to have the hill descent control, which is
yes.
that's a big thing, obviously, of Land Rover's products now. But that was the very first model to have it.
I remember test driving one before I got the Jimny, and it's that big chunky yellow button just in front of the gear lever. I was like, oh, this is technical. I quite like this. And they're quite sweet cars to drive, actually. They're quite nicely balanced, but I just sort of I remember there sort of being this bit of a disdain for them within the Land Rover community for a little while, and thinking, I don't get why. So yeah, there we are. There's our bonus picks when it comes to the lead feature in this week's issue. Elsewhere, we of course have 5 trials for the Aston Martin Vantage. Richie Barnett's Honda Civic joins the classic fleet, and Keepers covers a rather tasty Saab, as well as we celebrate a used and enjoyed Lada in the Next Generation Diaries, while the way we were set off to Bournemouth. So there is plenty to enjoy in this week's edition of Classic Car Weekly. Obviously, we'd recommend you subscribe to never miss an issue, and of course you get free delivery. Otherwise, make sure you pick it up on shop shelves at the moment. Gents, is there anything else to add before we set back to work with the next issue?
I think it's going to be another good issue next week, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, anything else from you, James?
Just to echo what David says, always a lot of effort goes into it. It's always worth a read or subscribe.
Perfect. We'll be back next week with another edition of Classic Car Weekly.